The day started like any other, with people moving through the busy square, each absorbed in their own world. The sun was bright, but not uncomfortably so. Street performers were scattered around, some playing guitar, others dancing, and a few simply setting up their instruments, waiting for the right moment. In a corner near the fountain, a woman sat quietly, her back straight, her hands resting on the edge of the piano in front of her. She didn't play often in public, but she came here sometimes to let the music speak. Even if no one was watching, he was with a group of friends, laughing and joking as they walked through the square. Their voices carried, blending with the ambient sounds of coins clinking in cups, the distant chatter of people, and the occasional bird overhead. When they noticed her sitting so still, he nudged his friend and whispered something that made the others chuckle. She looked ordinary at first glance, unassuming. There was nothing about her that screamed performance or fame. To them, she seemed like someone who didn't belong to the noise and energy around her. As they got closer, he smirked and decided to make a joke. He called out, loud enough for a few nearby people to hear, "Hey, play something for us." The words were meant to tease, to see her reaction, and maybe get a laugh out of his friends. He didn't expect her to respond seriously. His laugh was casual, a little mocking as he turned back to his friends, expecting her to just ignore him. But she didn't ignore him. She looked up at him, calm and composed. Her eyes were steady, unflinching. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. She didn't argue. She didn't react with surprise or embarrassment. She simply slid onto the bench in front of the piano, her posture straight and confident. The small crowd that had started gathering, drawn by his loud voice, murmured quietly. Some were curious, others were skeptical. They expected the scene to be amusing at best. He raised his eyebrows, surprised. "You're actually going to play?" he asked, his tones still teasing, though a hint of uncertainty crept in. She nodded, her hands hovering over the keys, not yet pressing them. The sound of her fingers moving slightly in the air was enough to catch attention. People leaned forward, expecting a mistake, a clumsy attempt, a funny tune that would make them laugh. But the silence that followed felt different, heavier somehow. It wasn't the silence of waiting for music. It was the silence of curiosity, of anticipation. Then she began. The first notes were simple, almost timid, but carefully placed. They didn't fill the square immediately, but they were clear, crisp, and precise. Some people glanced around, unsure if this was part of the joke or something else. The laughter that had lingered in the air began to fade, replaced by a quiet focus. Her hands moved over the keys with grace, but there was a weight behind each note, subtle power that made the music feel alive. He watched, unable to look away. His friends were quiet now too, caught off guard by the sound. The woman didn't speak, didn't look at anyone. She didn't need to. The music spoke for her. With every chord, she wove a story that no one could put into words, yet everyone could feel. The tune was familiar in its sadness, yet unique in the way it carried hope and resilience. People started dropping their small comments and chatter. Conversations paused mid-sentence, phones were lowered, and a hush settled over the square. He felt a strange tug at his chest. The joke he intended, the playful teasing, was lost in the moment. She wasn't playing to entertain him or his friends. She wasn't playing to be laughed at or admired. She was playing because it was part of her, because the music inside her needed to be released. And the way she did it, it was so real, so honest. It made him feel exposed in a way he wasn't prepared for. Around him, strangers were reacting. Some had tears in their eyes. Some nodded subtly, connecting with something they couldn't name. Others stood frozen, mesmerized by the flow of notes. He noticed a few children pressing their faces against their parents, listening with wide eyes, sensing the depth of the moment, even if they didn't understand the story the music was telling. There was no cheering, no clapping yet. Just a profound silence filled with attention and respect. His friends looked at him, their smiles gone, replaced by the same shock he felt. One whispered, "I didn't expect this." Another just shook their head slowly, as if they were trying to process what they were hearing. The teasing energy that had brought them here was gone, replaced by a deep respect, not just for her, but for the music itself. It had a gravity that caught everyone off guard. He couldn't look at her directly. Part of him felt guilty for asking her to play as a joke. Part of him was in awe, realizing that she had taken something so casual, something meant to be funny, and transformed it into a moment that touched everyone present. He wanted to say something, apologize perhaps, or compliment her, but he felt words would ruin the magic. He just listened, letting the music wash over him and the crowd around them. She continued to play, her fingers dancing lightly on the keys, shifting through melodies that felt both sad and uplifting. It was as if every note carried a piece of her story, her struggles, her silent victories. The tune seemed to stretch beyond the square, beyond the fountain, beyond the curious crowd. It reached into the hearts of those who paused to listen. Even the pigeons that had been pecking around seemed to still, as if acknowledging the moment. There was a rhythm to her playing that didn't just entertain, communicated something deeper, something universal. Time seemed to blur. What felt like minutes was probably only a few moments, yet everyone felt it as if hours had passed. People who had been walking by stopped, their bags dangling from their hands, their attention caught. Some whispered to their companions, "Listen, just listen." The atmosphere changed from casual street activity to something sacred, something shared quietly among strangers, who suddenly felt connected by a single thread of music. He watched the way her hands moved. They were steady, controlled, yet full of emotion. There was no hesitation, no faltering, no fear. Each key she pressed told a story of someone who had been underestimated, overlooked, and yet persisted. Her posture, her focus, the way she seemed unaware of the audience, it all spoke of years of dedication, of private practice, of moments spent alone, honing a skill not for recognition, but for survival. For expression, the irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. He had asked her to play as a joke, expecting to amuse his friends. Instead, he had been confronted with the raw reality of someone's talent and spirit. It was humbling, unnerving, and profoundly moving. He felt a shift inside him, a quiet awareness that he had been blind in ways he hadn't noticed. He realized how often people judge quickly, assuming things based on appearance, demeanor, or circumstance. And now, here he was, having to confront his own superficiality in real time, even as he tried to comprehend the impact. The crowd around them grew. Strangers who had never met her, who didn't know her story, were affected. Someone dropped a coin into her open case, not as a token, but almost instinctively, as if acknowledging her presence and contribution. A man standing near the fountain whispered, "That was incredible." Children peeked at their parents, expecting them to explain, yet words were unnecessary. The music spoke more eloquently than any sentence could. By the end of her piece, a quiet awe filled the space. She pressed the final note gently, allowing it to linger in the air before letting it fade naturally. No one moved immediately. The pause was deliberate, respectful, almost reverent. And then, slowly, the applause began. It was hesitant at first. Soft claps that grew steadily as more people realized what they had just experienced. He, too, clapped. But it felt insufficient compared to the depth of what had just been shared. She didn't turn to acknowledge the applause fully. She didn't smile, though there was a small, subtle expression, almost imperceptible, as if she had expected nothing and received everything quietly. She slid from the bench and adjusted her things, packing them carefully. The moment was over as swiftly as it had begun, yet its impression lingered. People looked at each other, exchanging glances of understanding. Having witnessed something rare and beautiful, he remained frozen in place for a few seconds, trying to process. He felt a mixture of embarrassment for his earlier joke, admiration for her talent, and awe at the raw authenticity of what had just occurred. He realized that he had been given a glimpse into someone's truth, someone's life story, conveyed not through words, but through music. And it had changed something in him already, quietly, irrevocably, as she walked away. Disappearing into the flow of the square, the crowd slowly dispersed, but the energy lingered. People whispered among themselves, some repeating fragments of the melody they could still hear in their minds. The laughter, the chatter, the casual noise of the square returned gradually. But a subtle sense of connection remained among those who had witnessed it. He turned to his friends, who were now silent, each absorbed in their own thoughts. No one made a joke. No one laughed. The moment had shifted something fundamental for them, too. A reminder that appearances are deceptive, and that sometimes the most extraordinary experiences come when least expected. He looked around, half hoping to see her again, to thank her or apologize, but she was gone, leaving behind only the memory of her music. And in that memory, he knew that something inside him had changed. The joke that was meant to amuse had turned into a lesson he would never forget, a reminder that real talent, real emotion, and real human connection are found in the places and moments we least expect. The moment after the applause faded was strangely quiet. The square returned to its usual rhythm, yet the energy lingered like an echo that refused to vanish. People continued walking by, some glancing back at the spot where she had been, as if expecting her to reappear, as if the memory of her music had left a mark they couldn't erase. He remained standing for a while, unable to move, watching where she had gone. His friends nudged him, whispering comments, but he barely heard them. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the notes, the subtle dynamics. The way she had made the piano sing as if it were a living being. It wasn't just the technical skill that had struck him. There were many musicians he had seen perform in public, some very talented, but this was different. It was the feeling behind the music, the emotion she poured into each note that carried weight. He could sense the story she had lived through even if he didn't know the details. Each chord seemed to hold a fragment of a life that had been challenging, lonely at times, and yet full of resilience. It made him aware of how often people hide their strengths, their depth, and their struggles under ordinary appearances. Around him, people were murmuring quietly. A man with a notebook scribbled furiously, trying to capture the feeling of what he had just experienced. A young woman clutched her bag, tears forming in her eyes, yet she didn't move. She had been unexpectedly moved by something that wasn't meant to affect her, and she found herself thinking about her own hidden talents, her own quiet ambitions that had been waiting for the right moment to shine. Children who had been listening seemed inspired in ways they didn't fully understand. They had seen a person simply do what she loved, unapologetically, and it had changed the tone of their day. He finally shook his head, trying to clear the sudden wave of humility that washed over him. It was strange to feel so small after witnessing someone else's gift. He had come here expecting to have a moment of fun at someone else's expense, and now he felt exposed, almost guilty. His mind replayed the joke he had made, the teasing tone, and he could hardly believe how different the outcome had been. She had taken his casual challenge and turned it into a moment of beauty and sincerity that none of them would forget. He remembered how her hands had moved over the keys, with confidence, yet gentleness. There was precision, yes, but also freedom, a sense that the piano was an extension of her own being. It wasn't about impressing anyone, and yet she had done exactly that. People were still watching where she had been, whispering, exchanging glances of admiration. Some looked at him and his friends, almost expecting an explanation. He didn't have one. He couldn't explain why someone could command such attention without saying a word, without a grand entrance, without showmanship. It was raw, unfiltered talent paired with authenticity. As he thought about it, he realized he had never truly listened to music like this before. He had enjoyed it, sure, but mostly for entertainment, background noise, or status. This was different. This was a story unfolding in real time, an experience that invited him to feel, to pause, to reflect. He felt almost as if she had reached into the crowd, into the hearts of everyone present, and asked them to take a moment to understand something deeper, something about struggle, about hope, about persistence. And they had listened, because it had been impossible not to. He found himself replaying the piece in his mind, note by note, trying to remember the moments that had struck him the most. The way she had transitioned from one chord to another, the subtle crescendos, the moments of silence that seemed to speak louder than sound. There was a particular melody in the middle, soft and almost fragile, that had made his chest tighten. It wasn't just music, it was emotion manifested in sound. He felt the weight of it and realized How unprepared he had been to receive something so profound from someone he had dismissed as a casual bystander around him. The crowd began to disperse, but he noticed that the energy hadn't completely faded. People were talking in hushed tones, reflecting on what they had just witnessed. A few approached the space where she had played, looking for her, hoping to perhaps leave a word of thanks or admiration. Some left quietly, carrying with them a small spark of inspiration. The street performers nearby seemed to play a little differently afterward, more thoughtfully, as if her presence had altered the way music could be approached. Even the environment felt slightly changed, as if the air itself had absorbed some of the honesty she had poured into the piano. He thought about how often people underestimate others, how often first impressions are misleading. She had appeared quiet, unassuming, almost like she was invisible, yet the moment she played, she dominated the attention not through arrogance or force, but through authenticity. That contrast struck him deeply. He realized that the greatest impact often comes from the unexpected, from those who are overlooked or underestimated. Her presence had reminded him of how easy it is to judge, how wrong one can be when doing so. He also thought about her courage. Playing in public, in front of strangers who expected her to fail or to entertain as a joke, must have required immense confidence. She hadn't flinched under their scrutiny. She hadn't catered to their expectations. She had simply expressed herself fully, without fear or hesitation. That courage, combined with her talent, had made a profound impression, one that would stay with him for a long time. He felt that he had learned something valuable, something beyond the usual lessons of life. It was a quiet reminder of the power of sincerity, of the impact of showing one's true self. The memory of her expression as she played stayed with him. She hadn't sought attention, hadn't smiled to please anyone, yet her presence commanded it. There was a calm strength in her posture, a quiet assertion of her worth that contrasted sharply with the casual, almost careless way he had approached her. He felt a pang of self-awareness, realizing how often he had undervalued people around him based on superficial impressions. She had taught him without intending to, that real depth is invisible until it is revealed through action, through dedication, through authenticity. He noticed the reactions of others around him too. The children who had watched her seemed to carry a sense of wonder in their eyes, as if they had seen a glimpse of something larger than themselves. Adults whispered to one another, sharing fragments of emotion that couldn't be captured fully in words. Even his friends were quiet now, reflecting in their own way, understanding that they had witnessed something rare. The atmosphere had shifted from casual amusement to a shared, almost sacred experience. He replayed the sequence of events over and over in his mind. The joke, the request, her calm acceptance, the music, the silence, the awe of the crowd. Each piece fit together like a puzzle, revealing more than he could have anticipated. It wasn't just a performance. It was an encounter with someone's truth, someone's life story expressed in a medium that transcended language. He realized that he had been part of something spontaneous, something unplanned, yet incredibly powerful. His friends eventually broke the spell with quiet commentary. But he barely noticed. He was too busy thinking about what it meant to witness raw talent expressed so fearlessly. He considered how often people hide their gifts, sometimes from fear, sometimes from doubt, sometimes from the world's tendency to dismiss them. She had overcome all of that, if only for a few moments in public, and the impact had been undeniable. That thought stayed with him, lingering long after the crowd dispersed and the square turned to its normal rhythm. He imagined what her life might have been like, practicing alone for years, facing challenges, learning to trust her own abilities, and finally sharing them when the moment demanded it. There was no hint of pride, no desire for validation, yet the validation was inevitable. People could not help but respond, moved by the sincerity of her expression. He realized that true talent does not seek approval. It simply exists, and its authenticity speaks for itself. As the day continued, he walked slowly through the square, reflecting on what he had seen. The laughter and chatter of other groups faded into the background for him. He was thinking, remembering, processing the unexpected lesson that had been delivered in the form of music. Every note, every pause, every subtle shift in her playing had left a mark, and he felt subtly changed by it. He knew he would carry the memory with him, not as entertainment, but as a quiet reminder of human potential, courage, and the power of authenticity. He thought about how the experience had affected the people around him. Strangers had connected through a single, unplanned event. Children had seen possibility in action. Adults had been reminded of the importance of humility and attention. He felt a sense of awe at how something so small, a single performance, requested as a joke, could ripple outward and touch lives in ways that no one could have predicted. It was a lesson in presence, in attentiveness, in the unexpected ways that life can teach profound truths. As he left the square, he glanced back one last time, hoping to catch a glimpse of her again, though he knew she was likely gone. Even without seeing her, he felt her presence in the space. In the lingering emotions of the crowd, in the memory of every note she had played, he realized that moments like these are rare, unplanned, and transformative. They remind people that the world is bigger than jokes and appearances, that real beauty and talent exist quietly, waiting to be acknowledged. And in that understanding, he felt a sense of gratitude, a sense of humility, and a renewed awareness of the depth of human expression. After she had walked away, the square slowly returned to its usual hum of activity. But for some, including him, the echoes of her music lingered. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had only seen the surface of something much deeper. Her performance had felt like a window into her life, a glimpse into years of experiences that had shaped her in ways people could not see at a glance. He found himself imagining her story, trying to understand the person behind the music. She hadn't always played in public. Not like this. Her love for music had begun in solitude, in a small room where the walls were lined with books and old photographs. She had discovered the piano when she was very young, a dusty instrument tucked away in a corner, rarely touched. But from the first time her fingers pressed the keys, she had felt a connection that went beyond sound. It was a language she could understand, a way to express things she couldn't put into words. The piano became her companion, her refuge from the challenges of growing up. From the moments when life felt uncertain or lonely, her early years were not easy. She had faced loss and struggle in ways that shaped her resilience. She learned quickly that not everyone would recognize her potential, that often people judged her before they understood her. But in those quiet moments with her piano, none of that mattered. She practiced for hours, perfecting techniques, learning songs by ear, experimenting with melodies. Each note she played was infused with her own emotions, her own story. Music became not only a skill but a way to process life, to survive and to heal. As she grew older, she continued to refine her talent in private. She rarely sought attention or recognition. There were competitions she could have entered, teachers who could have guided her, yet she chose to rely on herself, to trust her instincts. The music was her voice, and she had learned that the world did not always need to hear it. Her performances were often confined to her room, to her own reflection in the mirror, to the quiet that allowed her to lose herself in sound. In those moments, she was free, unjudged, and wholly present. Life outside the music was equally demanding. She had responsibilities, obligations that often pulled her away from the piano. There were times she had to work jobs that required her to be someone she wasn't. Times when she had to hide her true talents just to survive. She had faced discouragement, subtle and direct, from people who didn't believe in her or didn't understand her priorities. And yet, every night, when she returned home, she would sit at the piano, and the world's doubts faded into silence. Her resilience was built in these quiet hours, and it was reflected in every note she played. Her choice to play in the square. That day had not been spontaneous in the usual sense. She had played there before, though sparsely. She felt the need to share a piece of her music with the world even briefly. But she had not expected anyone to challenge her or call her out. When he asked her to play as a joke, she sensed that it was more than a casual request. It carried the undertone of doubt, of ridicule, and yet she chose to respond. She sat at the piano calmly, trusting her preparation, trusting the years of practice, trusting herself. The decision was not made lightly. It was an act of courage born from years of quiet perseverance. As she played, the music conveyed emotions that words could not capture. There was a sadness, yes, but it was intertwined with hope, with determination, with the quiet pride of someone who had survived challenges that others could not see. Each chord, each melody, was an echo of her journey, a narrative of perseverance and patience. It was impossible for the audience to know all of this, yet they felt it instinctively. The depth of her experience resonated in a way that transcended explanation. He had been struck by the immediacy of the effect. People who had been laughing, expecting to see something trivial, were now silent, captivated. The transformation was not in the audience, but in the music itself. She had created a space where superficial judgments could not survive, where people were invited to witness truth, to engage with honesty, to feel something profound. Her playing carried authenticity, and authenticity cannot be faked. It comes only from experience, from having lived, from having faced life with courage and openness. She remembered a time when she had performed in front of only one other person, a mentor who had taught her early on that music was more than notes. That person had listened, offered guidance, but never applause. The lessons learned in those moments had shaped her understanding of performance. It was not about recognition, it was about connection, about creating an experience for those who truly heard. That philosophy guided her as she sat at the piano in the square, shaping the way she expressed herself, influencing every subtle choice in tempo, volume, and phrasing. Even in her private life, she had been careful to guard her talents. She had seen jealousy, misunderstanding, and dismissal from peers. Many times her abilities had been minimized, her dedication questioned, and yet she persisted. It was in these quiet victories, these unnoticed moments of growth, she had built the confidence that allowed her to face a skeptical crowd without hesitation. She didn't need validation. She had validation from within, forged through discipline and self-belief. The audience, unaware of these years of preparation, was nonetheless affected. They experienced the culmination of her efforts, the distillation of her life's journey in a matter of minutes. That is the power of art, to compress experience into a form that communicates universally. She had become a vessel for emotion, for story, for human connection. Her music reminded everyone that there are layers to every person, stories that go unseen, strengths that are hidden, and resilience that is quietly maintained. He, in particular, was feeling this more than most. He had underestimated her, expected a joke, and instead encountered mastery and depth. He thought about how often he had done the same to others, judging quickly, laughing at first impressions, missing the richness beneath the surface. Her playing had forced him to confront these patterns, to acknowledge the error in casual judgment. He felt both humbled and inspired, aware that he had been taught a lesson that was subtle yet unforgettable. Meanwhile, she played on, immersed in her own expression. Unaware of the profound effect she had on the crowd, she wasn't performing for accolades, for attention, or even for him. She was performing because it was the truest way she could communicate in that moment. The music was her message, and she trusted it to reach those who could receive it. The emotions, the stories, the experiences that had shaped her were all present in every note, and they radiated outward, touching people in ways that words could never achieve. The depth of her music also reflected a sense of control, a mastery developed over years of disciplined practice. It was not reckless emotion. It was refined, intentional, deliberate. She knew when to soften a note, when to linger, when to build momentum. Each decision was rooted in a combination of instinct, training, and experience. The result was a performance that felt both effortless and profound. Simple in appearance, but extraordinarily complex in its impact. He noticed how the crowd responded, and it only reinforced the realization that music has the power to transcend ordinary barriers. People who had no personal connection to her, who knew nothing about her history, were moved nonetheless. They felt the humanity in the performance, the vulnerability, the courage, the authenticity. It was a reminder that sometimes, even strangers can reach one another deeply without words. Through shared experience, in the quiet moments after the final note, he understood that he had been given a rare glimpse into a life lived with dedication, resilience, and grace. He reflected on how her past full of challenges, lessons, and perseverance had culminated in this spontaneous, unplanned moment. It was a moment that would stay with him, a lesson in humility, appreciation, and the recognition of unseen talent. The encounter had reminded him of the importance of paying attention, of looking beyond appearances, and of respecting the journey each person carries within them. As she disappeared into the crowd, he felt a mixture of awe and reflection. He realized that her life story, though unknown to most, had shaped the very performance they had witnessed. Her music was not just sound, it was the embodiment of her experiences, her resilience, and her understanding of herself and the world. He felt grateful, humbled, and quietly inspired, knowing that moments like these are rare and that sometimes a single person's courage and dedication can touch the hearts of many without them ever knowing the full story. The square was quiet, almost reverent, as the last notes of her music lingered in the air. People shifted uneasily, not wanting to break the spell. He noticed the expressions on the faces around him, strangers who had come and gone, now frozen in a shared experience. Their laughter, which had been casual and careless before, had vanished, replaced by an almost tangible awe. Even those who had been skeptical were now quiet, their eyes following where she had sat, the invisible echo of her presence still resonating in the air. He stood there, feeling a strange mix of humility and disbelief. He had come expecting to have a moment of amusement at someone else's expense, and instead, he had witnessed something extraordinary. His friends were similarly silent, each processing the experience in their own way. None of them spoke, not because they didn't have anything to say, but because words felt inadequate. The impact of her music was more than they could express. It had reached a place inside them that was rarely touched by casual interactions or street performances. For him, the moment was a mirror, reflecting his own behavior and assumptions. He had underestimated her, judged her by appearance, expected a joke, and assumed he held the upper hand. The reality had shattered that illusion in an instant. He felt the weight of his superficiality pressing on him, a discomfort he couldn't easily shake. He realized how often he had done the same to others, how often he had dismissed people without truly seeing them. The music had exposed not just her depth, but his own blind spots. Around him, the crowd began to speak in hushed tones, each person sharing fragments of what they had felt. Some described the melody, others the subtle emotions they had sensed. A few were visibly moved, dabbing at their eyes or holding their hands to their chests. Even the children who had watched seemed changed, their eyes wide with the realization that someone so ordinary could carry so much depth. The experience was simple, yet profound. A reminder that extraordinary moments often appear in the most unexpected places. He thought about the courage it must have taken for her to play, to accept a request made as a joke, to sit down in front of strangers who expected her to fail. And to deliver such a performance, it was remarkable. She hadn't sought validation, hadn't performed for approval or recognition. She had played because it was a part of her, because the music demanded to be heard. That courage, combined with her skill and authenticity, had created an experience that none of them would forget. As he reflected, he noticed subtle details he had missed the first time. The way her fingers moved with confidence yet delicacy. The way she shifted her weight slightly as she reached for certain keys. The small expressions that crossed her face as she became lost in the music. Each gesture carried intention, each movement reflected years of practice and a deep understanding of her instrument. The more he observed, the more he realized that what he had witnessed was the culmination of a lifetime of dedication. Not a spontaneous display. He also began to notice the reactions of those around him more closely. People were still gathered, though the crowd had thinned. A woman clutched her coat, whispering to a friend about how she felt transported by the music. A man leaned against the fountain, eyes closed, absorbing the lingering vibrations. A teenager tapped his foot lightly, still caught in the rhythm, trying to capture a fragment of the feeling in his own mind. The shared experience had created a silent bond among strangers. A connection forged not by conversation, but by the universal language of music. He thought about how rare it was to witness something so genuine, so unfiltered. In a world where so much is staged, performative, or filtered for effect, this moment was raw and real. It reminded him that authenticity carries power, that truth has a way of resonating with others even when it is unexpected. Her performance had not been a display of skill for recognition. It had been a revelation of self, and that revelation had touched everyone present. He glanced at his friends, noting the same quiet reflection on their faces. They had come seeking entertainment, a moment to laugh and tease, and instead had received a lesson in humility and perception. The transformation in their demeanor was subtle but noticeable. Their laughter was replaced with thoughtfulness, their casual conversation with silent contemplation. The experience had shifted their perspective, not just about her, but about how easily they had judged and underestimated others. As he continued to watch, he realized that the true impact of her music extended beyond the square. People who had heard her would carry that moment with them, sharing it in small ways, telling friends, remembering it during quiet moments. Her music had created ripples, affecting more than just those present. It was a reminder that actions, even unplanned ones, have the power to influence and inspire others in ways we cannot predict. He found himself thinking about the lessons he could take from the experience. First, never underestimate someone based on appearance or initial impressions. Second, recognize the courage it takes to share one's true self, even in the face of skepticism or ridicule. Third, understand that the impact of authenticity can be profound, touching people in ways that are subtle yet enduring. These were lessons he knew he would carry forward, applied not just to interactions with strangers, but to relationships, opportunities, and judgments in his daily life. As he reflected, he noticed a few people approaching where she had been, hoping to catch a glimpse or offer a small gesture of thanks. Some dropped coins into the piano case she had used. Others simply lingered, feeling a sense of gratitude for what they had witnessed. Even though she had left, her presence remained, not in form, but in effect. The square itself felt altered, imbued with the quiet energy of an experience that had transcended the ordinary. He thought about how music, in its purest form, can communicate emotions that words cannot. It can carry stories, convey struggles, celebrate victories, and inspire hope. Her playing had done all of this without a single word, without any embellishment, without seeking applause. It was a profound demonstration of the power of human expression and the universality of emotion. The realization hit him that her courage and talent had not only changed the atmosphere in the square, but had also initiated a shift within him. He felt a desire to be more aware, more attentive, more appreciative of the depth in people he might otherwise overlook. He wanted to approach the world with less judgment and more openness, to recognize the unseen talents and struggles of those around him. Her performance had been a mirror, reflecting not just her story, but the areas in his own life that needed reflection and growth. As he processed these thoughts, he noticed the subtle ways the crowd was dispersing, each person carrying a piece of the experience with them. Conversations were quieter, steps slower, glances more thoughtful. The impact of her music lingered like a soft vibration in the air, shared memory that connected strangers through something intangible yet deeply human. It was a reminder that art, courage, and authenticity have the power to bridge gaps, to create understanding, and to touch lives in meaningful ways. He realized that he would likely never see her again, that the moment they had shared was fleeting, and yet its influence would remain. It was a quiet revelation that would shape the way he saw people, the way he approached situations, the way he judged and appreciated talent. The lesson was simple but profound. Never underestimate the quiet, the unassuming, the overlooked. True depth often exists beneath the surface. Waiting for the right moment to reveal itself, he continued walking through the square, glancing back occasionally, hoping for a glimpse of her, a final acknowledgement, a small smile. But she was gone, as if she had never been there, leaving only the echo of her music and the impression it had made. He felt a sense of gratitude for having witnessed it, for having been present in that rare moment where life offered something unexpectedly beautiful and deeply meaningful. As the day went on, he carried the experience with him, playing the music in his mind, reflecting on the courage, skill, and authenticity it represented. He thought about the people around him, the strangers who had shared in the moment, and the silent connection that had been formed. It was a reminder that even small, unplanned actions, when done with sincerity and dedication, can have lasting effects far beyond what one might imagine. The music had changed the atmosphere, the crowd, and him, and in that change, he found a quiet sense of hope and appreciation for the unexpected beauty of human expression. As the day went on, the memory of her music stayed with him. Even as he walked through other streets and heard the usual noise of the city, the notes she had played echoed in his mind. It was as if the square had been transformed for a brief moment into a place where time slowed, where people listened, where emotions were raw and honest. He realized that the impact of what he had witnessed was not limited to that spot or that moment. It had become part of him, a subtle shift in how he saw the world and the people in it. He thought about how quickly life moves, and how often people miss the extraordinary in the ordinary. The woman he had underestimated, who had seemed quiet and unassuming, had shown him something profound. It was not just her technical skill, impressive as it was, but the depth of her expression. The courage to share something so personal in a public space, and the authenticity with which she did it. Her playing had reminded him that the world is full of hidden stories, quiet struggles, and talents that go unnoticed until someone takes the time to see them. People who had been there, even if only briefly, carried the memory of that performance with them. Some shared it with friends or family, describing the music and the way it had moved them. Others remembered the expressions of the crowd, the sudden silence, the unexpected emotion that had filled the air. Even strangers who had been passing by felt something shift in their day. It was a shared human experience, fleeting but meaningful, the kind that cannot be captured in photographs or videos. Only remembered in the heart. He reflected on his own role in the event. The joke he had made, the teasing request, had set the stage, yet he could never have predicted the outcome. He felt a mixture of humility and gratitude, understanding that sometimes even our careless actions can lead to unexpectedly beautiful moments. He also felt a quiet responsibility, a reminder that words and actions carry weight, and that it is worth being mindful of how we treat others. Even in seemingly trivial situations, the memory of her performance became a guide for him. He thought about the way she had faced the challenge, her calmness in front of strangers, her focus, and her dedication. It reminded him that courage is not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it is quiet, persistent, and unassuming. It also reminded him that real talent does not need to seek attention. It speaks for itself. The lesson was clear: to recognize and appreciate what is genuine, and to approach life with humility and openness. Days later, he found himself thinking about the woman again, wondering where she was, what she was doing, and whether she realized the effect she had on those around her. He imagined her continuing her life quietly, playing music for herself or in small, intimate spaces, never seeking recognition, but always touching those who had the chance to truly listen. He realized that her impact was not dependent on an audience. It was inherent in her expression, in the way she lived and created. The experience also changed the way he viewed other people. He became more aware of the hidden depths in those around him, of the talents and stories that might not be immediately visible. He noticed the quiet individuals, the overlooked, and he made an effort to listen, to observe, to appreciate. It was a small shift, but it changed his interactions, his judgments, and his expectations. He realized that every person carries experiences and strengths that are not always obvious, and that taking the time to recognize them can lead to unexpected understanding and connection. He also thought about the lessons for life beyond music, the importance of patience, persistence, and dedication. Even when no one is watching, was something he could apply in his own endeavors. The way she had honed her skills, faced challenges, and remained authentic, regardless of external validation, was inspiring. It reminded him that real growth happens in private through consistent effort, and that the courage to share oneself openly can create moments of beauty that touch others deeply. The square itself remained a quiet memory, a symbol of the brief but powerful convergence of lives. He thought about the people who had been there, the children who had watched with wide eyes, the adults who had been unexpectedly moved, the strangers who had felt a silent connection through the music. Each person carried a piece of that moment forward in small ways that could ripple through their lives. It was a reminder that even brief experiences, shared authentically, can leave lasting impressions. He reflected on how rare it is to witness something so genuine, and how easily such moments can be overlooked or forgotten. The woman had given herself fully to the music, and in doing so, had given others a gift they would carry with them. The lesson was simple. Authenticity matters, courage matters, and the willingness to share oneself can create beauty that is greater than the sum of its parts. He thought about the ripple effects of that day. Perhaps some people had been inspired to pursue their own hidden talents, to take risks they had been afraid to take. Perhaps some had been reminded of the importance of noticing and appreciating the unseen qualities in others. The impact of her music extended far beyond the square, touching lives in ways that could not be measured, only felt.